Resist, you probably think men are easy to compliment. Tell him he looks good. Tell him he's smart. Tell him he's attractive. And yet somehow it doesn't land the way you expect. I know that feeling. You say something nice, you see a quick smile, maybe a thank you, and then nothing changes. No deeper connection, no shift in how he shows up, no sense that you actually reached him. Here's the uncomfortable truth most people never say out loud. Men don't feel deeply affected by most compliments they receive, not because they're arrogant, not because they don't care, but because most compliments completely miss the part of them that's starving to be seen. Think about it. When was the last time a man was genuinely asked how he's holding it all together? When was the last time someone acknowledged the weight he carries quietly? Most men move through life feeling measured, not appreciated, judged, not understood, valued for what they provide, not for who they are when no one is watching. I remember reading a psychological survey years ago where men were asked what kind of praise actually stayed with them. Not what sounded nice in the moment, but what they remembered years later. And what shocked me wasn't the answers. It was how rarely they'd heard those things at all. Here's the irony. Women often believe they're being generous with compliments. Men often feel emotionally invisible at the exact same time. So when you tell a man, "You're handsome," it might feel pleasant, but it doesn't touch his core. It doesn't reach the part of him that wonders, am I enough? Am I doing this right? Does anyone actually see the effort I make? And before you think, well, men should just open up more, pause for a second. Men learn very early that admiration is conditional. You're praised when you win, respected when you perform, desired when you appear confident. Very few people ever stop and say, I see the kind of man you're trying to be. So when a compliment does hit that place, when it recognizes his character, his reliability, his restraint, his intention, it doesn't just feel good, it feels rare. It feels grounding. It feels like someone finally spoke to the part of him that never asks for attention, but quietly hopes for it anyway. And that's what this video is really about. Not how to flatter a man, not how to boost his ego, but how to speak to the part of him that remembers your words long after the moment has passed. Because there are a handful of compliments, just 5, that men don't resist, not because they're manipulative, but because they meet a need most men never admit out loud. And once you understand those, you'll never compliment a man the same way again. Think about it this way. For most of history, men weren't praised for how they felt. They were recognized for who they were becoming. Their discipline, their steadiness, their ability to hold a line when things got hard. There's an old idea in Eastern philosophy that says a person becomes what is reflected back to them, not what they want to be. Not what they say they are, what the world consistently notices and names. Monks believed that attention is not neutral. What you pay attention to, you strengthen. What you ignore withers. Now apply that to men. Most men grow up with their attention reflected back in very narrow ways. Success, strength. If you perform, you're valued. If you struggle quietly, you're invisible. So over time, men learn to armor themselves, not because they don't feel deeply, but because nothing taught them it was safe or useful to be seen there. And here's where it gets interesting. Modern psychology actually backs this up. I remember reading a study on attachment and praise styles that showed something surprising. Men didn't respond most strongly to compliments about attractiveness or intelligence. They responded most strongly to compliments that affirmed competence, reliability, and moral character. Why? Because those compliments don't just say, "You're impressive." They say, "You matter." Attachment theory explains this beautifully. A secure bond isn't built through excitement alone. It's built through recognition. Feeling known, feeling trusted, feeling respected. And for men especially, respect is emotional safety. When a man hears a compliment that recognizes his effort or his integrity, something happens internally. His nervous system settles. His shoulders drop. He feels anchored because now he's not guessing anymore. He's not wondering if he's failing silently. He's not performing for approval. He's being seen. Here's the mistake most people make. They think compliments are about giving energy, making someone feel good, lifting them up. But the most powerful compliments don't add anything. They name something that's already there. Think about the difference. You're amazing is vague. You always show up when it matters, even when you're exhausted, is specific. One feels pleasant, the other feels personal, and personal is what sticks. Men don't resist compliments because they're uncomfortable with praise. They resist compliments that feel generic, surface level, or disconnected from who they believe themselves to be. But when a compliment aligns with a man's internal values, the standards he holds himself to, it feels like relief, like someone finally noticed the invisible work. I've heard men describe this moment in almost the same words. Yeah. It felt like she saw something in me I hadn't been able to articulate. That's not ego. That's identity. And this is why the right compliment doesn't just affect how a man feels about himself. It affects how he feels about you. Because humans bond to the people who make them feel most like themselves. Not the most impressive version, not the most confident version, the most honest version. So when you compliment a man in a way that reflects his character, his steadiness, his intention, you're not just making him feel good, you're telling his nervous system, you're safe here. You don't have to perform. And once a man feels that, attraction deepens, trust forms, and connection stops being something he has to earn. Now let me show you exactly what those compliments sound like. Let's start with the first compliment, because it's the one most people underestimate. I feel safe with you. On the surface, it sounds simple, almost casual. But psychologically, it lands far deeper than you realize. For a man, safety isn't about dominance. It's not about being in control. It's about being trusted with someone's vulnerability. When you tell a man you feel safe with him, you're not praising his strength. You're acknowledging his restraint. Think about that. Most men are taught that power is something to prove. But safety is something you earn. I remember reading a study on perceived trustworthiness that showed men who were seen as emotionally regulated, not reactive, not explosive, were rated as more attractive long-term partners than men who were simply confident or assertive. Safety signals maturity. So when you say, I feel calm around you, or I trust you with how I feel, his nervous system hears something very specific. You're not a threat. You're not a test. Oh, you're a place I can rest. That hits a part of him most compliments never reach. The second compliment is one men almost never hear, but desperately want to. You're reliable. Not flashy. Not romantic on the surface, but incredibly powerful. Reliability is a man's private measuring stick. It's how he knows if he's failing or succeeding as a person, not just a partner. When you notice that he does what he says he'll do, that he follows through even when it's inconvenient, you're recognizing discipline. And discipline is deeply tied to masculine self-respect. I've heard men say, no one notices the things I quietly make sure don't fall apart. But that's reliability. So when you say, I know I can count on you, you're not complimenting an action, you're affirming a value. The third compliment shifts everything emotionally. You really understand me. Most men go through relationships feeling tolerated, not understood. They listen, they adjust, they try, but rarely feel met in the middle. When you tell a man he understands you, you're telling him his attention matters. His presence matters. His effort to know you wasn't wasted. And here's why that's important. Men often fear that emotional closeness will lead to criticism. That opening up will turn into evaluation. But understanding feels different. It feels like acceptance without conditions. Think about it this way. Being admired feels good. Being understood feels intimate. That's why this compliment doesn't make a man puff up. It makes him soften. The fourth compliment is subtle, and this is where people often get it wrong. You make me better. But this is not the same as I need you. And it's definitely not I wouldn't be okay without you. Those statements create pressure. They turn attraction into responsibility. But "I grow around you" does something else entirely. Men are wired to contribute, not to rescue, but to add. When you acknowledge that your life expands in his presence, that you think clearer, feel steadier, act braver, you're telling him his influence is positive, not draining. That's huge. Because one of a man's deepest fears is being a burden emotionally. Or worse, being resented for trying. This compliment reassures him that who he is naturally brings value. Now, the fifth compliment is the most powerful of all, and it's the one that separates fleeting attraction from lasting attachment. "I respect the way you." Notice how that sentence doesn't end. That's intentional. Respect has to be specific to be real. "I respect the way you handle pressure." "I respect how you keep your word." "I respect how you don't take shortcuts, even when no one would know." This kind of compliment hits a man's core identity. I remember a therapist once saying, "Men fall in love where they feel respected, women fall in love where they feel cherished." There's truth in that. When you respect a man's character, not just his outcomes, you're telling him he doesn't have to prove himself to be worthy of love. And that's when something shifts, because attraction fades when it's fueled by performance. But attachment grows when it's rooted in respect. These 5 compliments don't inflate a man's ego. They quiet his insecurity. They don't make him feel superior. They make him feel seen. And when a man feels seen, he doesn't forget the person who saw him first. Now, here's the part most people never talk about. These compliments only work when they're true. I know that sounds obvious, but it's where everything either deepens or quietly collapses. Men are incredibly sensitive to authenticity, not because they're suspicious by nature, but because they've learned to be. Many men have experienced praise being used as currency, given to get something, withdrawn when expectations aren't met. So when a compliment feels strategic instead of sincere, his body knows before his mind does. I remember reading a neuroscience paper on microperception, the idea that humans subconsciously detect inconsistencies in tone, timing, and emotional congruence. The brain flags it as unsafe long before we can articulate why. That's why flattery feels hollow, but recognition feels grounding. Think about it this way. A compliment isn't powerful because of the words. It's powerful because of the attention behind it. When you slow down enough to notice a man's patterns, how he handles stress, how he keeps his promises, how he shows care without being asked, you're not giving him something. You're reflecting him back to himself. And reflection is intimacy. Here's where this changes how you show up in relationships. Most people wait for big moments to express appreciation. The promotion, the grand gesture, the obvious win. But men don't build their identity in big moments. They build it in repetition. In the quiet decisions no one applauds. So the compliments that matter most are often spoken in unremarkable moments. When he fixes something without mentioning it, when he listens without interrupting, when he stays steady while you're overwhelmed. That's when your words land. And there's another layer here that's important. Compliments don't just affect how a man feels about you. They subtly influence how he behaves around you. Psychologists call this identity reinforcement. When a behavior is named and appreciated, people unconsciously strive to live up to that version of themselves. So when you say, "I respect how you handle conflict without shutting down," you're not just noticing him, you're reinforcing that trait. You're saying, "This is who you are here," and people protect identities that feel valued. This is why some men seem more present, more generous, more emotionally available in certain relationships, and completely withdrawn in others. It's not always about compatibility. Sometimes it's about reflection. Now, let's clear up a fear you might have. You might be thinking, if I compliment him like this, won't he get complacent? Won't I lose leverage? That fear comes from a belief that appreciation reduces attraction. But psychology shows the opposite when appreciation is specific and earned. Generic praise can feel cheap, Targeted recognition creates emotional investment because now he's not chasing approval. He's protecting connection. There's a quiet confidence that forms in men when they feel respected. They stop posturing. They stop testing. They stop pulling away to regain control. They lean in. And here's the part that's rarely said out loud. Compliments like these don't work when you use them to compensate for unmet needs. They work when they're an expression of presence, not a substitute for boundaries. You can appreciate a man deeply and still hold standards. You can respect him and still expect consistency. In fact, respect without standards feels confusing. Standards without respect feel cold. The balance is what creates attraction. I've spoken to countless women who say, the moment I stopped withholding appreciation, everything shifted. Not because the man changed overnight, but because the dynamic softened. Men respond to environments where they feel both seen and accountable. And finally, this matters whether you're in a relationship, dating, or even reflecting on past connections. Because the truth is, the words you speak to someone become part of their inner dialogue. When you name a man's steadiness, he starts seeing himself as steady. When you acknowledge his integrity, he protects it more fiercely. When you respect his effort, he invests more willingly. And here's the quiet power in that. You don't have to chase connection. You don't have to perform affection. You don't have to over-explain your value. You simply have to notice what's real and say it out loud. That's not manipulation, that's presence. And presence, more than chemistry, more than attraction, more than timing, is what creates bonds that last. So if you take nothing else from this, remember this one thing. Flattery tries to impress. Recognition makes someone feel known, and people don't walk away from where they feel known. Let me leave you with something that might quietly change how you relate to men forever. Most people think connection is built through intensity, through chemistry, through saying the right thing at the right time. But real connection is built through attunement. Think about it this way. Every man is walking around with an unspoken question running in the background of his life. Am I doing enough? Am I getting this right? Does who I am actually matter to anyone? He rarely says it. He rarely even admits it to himself. But it's there. I remember reading a long-term relationship study that tracked what men remembered most vividly from past partners. Not the dramatic moments, not the passion, not even the conflict. What stayed with them were very specific sentences, offhand comments, quiet acknowledgements, things like, "You handled that really well," or "I noticed you didn't take the easy way out, or "You don't even realize how steady you are." Those words didn't feel big at the time, but years later, men could repeat them almost verbatim. Why? Because those moments answered the question he never asked out loud. Here's something important to understand. Men don't need constant reassurance. They need accurate reflection. There's a difference. Reassurance tries to soothe the insecurity. Reflection names reality. And when you reflect a man accurately, you give him something rare, clarity about who he is in your presence. That clarity is calming. It's grounding. It makes connection feel safe instead of fragile. This is why the compliments we talked about aren't about saying more. They're about seeing better. You don't need to compliment constantly. You need to compliment precisely. One well-timed, specific acknowledgement can do more than 100 vague affirmations. And this matters not just for attraction, but for the kind of relationship you're building. Because men don't stay where they feel admired temporarily. They stay where they feel respected consistently. And respect isn't loud. It's steady. It sounds like noticing his effort even when it doesn't benefit you directly. It sounds like acknowledging his restraint when he could have reacted differently. It sounds like recognizing his consistency, not just his charm. Now, I want to say something gently because I know some part of you might be thinking it. What if I do this and he still doesn't show up the way I need? That's a real fear. And here's the truth. Compliments don't fix misalignment. They don't compensate for lack of effort. They don't turn potential into commitment. what they do is reveal. When a man receives sincere recognition and leans in, invests more, becomes more present, you learn he's capable of meeting you. When a man receives respect and stays distant, inconsistent, or emotionally unavailable, you learn something just as valuable. Clarity is not rejection, it's information, and information protects your heart. This is why using compliments as a way to manipulate outcomes always backfires. Not because men reject appreciation, but because manipulation erodes trust. But when compliments come from presence, they don't try to control the future. They simply say, "This is what I see right now." And that honesty creates safety for both of you. There's also something else happening when you speak this way. You change how you relate to love. You stop trying to earn connection through effort. You stop withholding warmth to maintain leverage. You stop second-guessing every interaction. You become more grounded. Because you're no longer performing affection, you're expressing perception. And perception is powerful. When you speak from perception, you don't lose yourself, you don't overextend, you don't abandon your standards. You simply tell the truth about what's in front of you. And here's the quiet paradox. The more accurately you see a man, the less you need him to validate you. Because now you're relating from awareness, not anxiety. So if you take one thing with you from all of this, let it be this. The most magnetic thing you can offer a man is not praise. It's recognition, not excitement, not mystery, but presence. When you see a man clearly and reflect him honestly, you give him something he rarely gets in the world. And people protect what feels rare, they invest in it, they return to it. They remember it. So the next time you feel the urge to say something nice, pause for just a second. Ask yourself, what am I actually noticing about him right now? Then say that. Because the right words, spoken from real attention, don't just make a man feel good in the moment. They become part of how he remembers you. And people don't forget the ones who saw them when no one else was looking.